Check these out. Banks iDash gauges and a ZZPerformance pillar pod. Today, I'm gonna go ahead and get these installed. We're gonna go ahead and start it off by taking a closer look at what you get when you do order your Banks gauges. This is the DataMonster version, and inside the box is a nice little cardboard presentation of the gauge itself. And of course, behind the gauge, you will receive the various components that you need to actually get everything set up. You have your ODB2 port plug, and this has a little connector on the end here that will actually plug into your primary gauge. These are capable of be running into multiple gauges, and you also have a slight amount of some paperwork, a little sticker, some zip ties, and some warranty information, registration information, as well as the mounting piece. This is actually going to go where the gauge will actually connect to this behind your pillar pod to hold it in place, and you'll have two little spin-on, almost like plastic nuts or whatever to hold everything in place. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at the super gauge, the non-DataMonster one, which will I selected as my secondary gauge. So when you select through the purchasing process, you're going to select either primary, secondary, your uses and whatnot. If you have any other components you're going to be wiring into it, these are capable of connecting to various additional sensors to give you more ability to monitor more functionality, such as a wideband or an ethanol sensor. Now, of course, the super gauge, you get the same presentation. The gauge looks identical on the front. Cannot tell the difference between a DataMonster and a normal super gauge. But on the back, it has some information and will actually give you the part number. Part numbers are different. And then, of course, as a secondary sensor, you have your box here. You have the same mounting hardware. These are the little nuts that I was referring to that's going to clamp this into place. And you, of course, have a different plug. The secondary one comes with a Y plug. And these are going to actually connect between your two sensors. And in your sensors, if you look on the back, have a little plug, little connection here. And then you will actually plug your primary is going to go to the smaller plug on the back. And then when you plug your two other sensors together, you're going to use the 6-pin plug right here. I went ahead and mounted the first gauge. This is the DataMonster gauge. I put it in the top position on the ZZPerformance pillar pod, as you can see here. Super simple on how these actually mount up. As you can see in the back side here, there is that black plastic sleeve, and then you have those white nuts that actually clamp between the sleeve and the gauge, and then that holds the gauge pretty secure. You just want to make sure you get this orientated how you want it, so you might want to eyeball this, actually like kind of go sit in the car, hold it up to the pillar that's in the car currently, and just get a general idea. Don't tighten these down super tight. They actually mention that in the instructions, and the instructions are on the website. I'll have a link in the description for the Banks instructions that kind of covers all of this in a nice web-based, almost like a PDF document. Unfortunately, there's no paper instructions they provide. You have to go to the web and check those out. But you want to get this nice and tight, but not so tight that it is actually maybe flexing this, because they say you could lose your button sensitivity, or the buttons may become unresponsive. So get it nice and tight, but enough so you can kind of rotate it maybe just a little bit. So if you want to tweak it once it's in the car and snap back into place, you can get a little bit of a rotation just to kind of orientate it exactly how you want. I eyeballed it and just went for this right now. But we'll go ahead and get the other super gauge in place. And what you want to do is you just want to go ahead and pass the gauge through. Now, it's going to be too far in to get the sleeve in there, but that's just to kind of so we can grab it and then kind of pull it out just a little bit so we have some clearance to work with it. And then you want to get the black sleeve and then drop it into place with the screws. Now, it is a kind of a tight fit, but you should be able to manage it without too much difficulty. Hopefully you can see it here. And then you want to get your little white little nuts here and spin these into place. And as mentioned, don't get these super tight quite yet, or really ever. You want to get them tight, but right now we're just getting them in place so the gauge doesn't fall off the pillar pod and onto your floor or whatever. So we'll get these somewhat tight so the gauge isn't just, you know, flopping around in here. And then if you take a look, here are the two gauges, and you know, kind of spin it to how you think you might like the view of the gauges in the car. I'm gonna go, you know, maybe like that for right now. And then I'm gonna give it a little bit more, tighten it. Nothing crazy. As mentioned, you don't want to over stress it. Just enough so it's not, you know, gonna be spinning as you're driving or hitting speed bumps or wherever, or, you know, aggressively driving in Mexico where they come loose. And yeah, these feel pretty good. You know, they sit pretty nice right here. And just a quick overview of the, maybe hard to see here, but I'll situate it for you. If you look at the gauge right here, the back, this is my secondary. Yes, the secondary gauge. Notice it has this little, this will be in the instructions, has a little, little kind of a jumper that sits right here. And you want that to be unplugged. There's gonna be one in each gauge. You do not want one in your primary. So you wanna unplug it from your primary gauge. For me, it's gonna be my DataMonster. And you wanna leave the jumper on your secondary gauge. It's gonna be like a termination jumper that terminates your chain. Now, if you're running a third gauge, if you have a triple pod, you will unplug it from the primary, secondary, and leave it in the third gauge. For me, I'm running 2 gauges for now, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave it in my secondary gauge, which is gonna be the bottom one. So I will leave this one, and I'm gonna remove the jumper from the top one. Now, there are slight differences. If you have an old version of these gauges, make sure you check out instructions for that. They're slightly different. As I mentioned, the link for those will be in the description. These are the newer version, version 2, and they actually show you a diagram of how to differentiate between version 1 and version 2. But the quick summary on that, version 2 has pins that stick out at the top of the board on the back side. Version 1, I believe it's pin holes where you actually will insert the brake jumper or whatever they call it. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the jumper from my primary gauge, which is my DataMonster, and then we're gonna go ahead and get inside the car and take a look at the OEM pillar, and we're gonna go ahead and get that removed. Real quick, before we jump in the car and get the OEM pillar removed, I wanted to show you the jumper that I was referring to. If it hopefully will, there we go. The focus on it, it's very small. It has just 2 little pin sockets on it. And as I mentioned, I removed this from my primary gauge, which is the DataMonster. Just pull straight out. And once you have that out, we're good to go. Make sure you leave the one in the secondary gauge. And if it doesn't have one, install this into your secondary gauge. Inside the car, and as you can see here, the driver's side pillar that we're going to be actually uninstalling. I did a quick look around, and this is the microphone right here. So when you remove this, just make sure you don't accidentally yank it too crazy and break that. Also inside of here is an airbag. No sensors in here to set the airbag off, so you don't really have to disconnect your battery. I mean, it's always a good practice to do that. I'm not going to. Hopefully I don't blow my face off. But so I'm going to try to get this off. It's going to require 2 hands. I guess it's a lot of force to get this thing off. And so I'm going to just kind of see. You can kind of get access to it through the weather sealing right here. I'm going to see if I can just get this thing to pop loose. And so I heard it is kind of a pain to get this thing off. I'm going to put the camera down, see if I can get this off, and let you know any pointers that I may find. Also, keep a note, there's a bungee that attaches this to the chassis. So when you get it loose, you're going to have to actually move the bungee over to the new pillar pod, pillar mount here. And so I'm going to see if I can get this off and see what issues I run into. So I pretty much just manhandled it, peeled it down, made sure I didn't go too crazy with it. And as you can see here, there are some cords and stuff down here. This looks to be the bungee, I believe, right here. And then right here is the microphone. And it looks like it just can pop out. I'll have to mess with this and see how I can get this off and how I can transfer the bungee over. And the pillar has been removed, and as you can see here on the back side, maybe if I get some decent lighting in here, there is kind of a slide clip here. So this is where the bungee cord mounts, and you actually have to reach around here. So if it's sitting in the car like this, pry up, lift up on a clip, and then this bungee hold mechanism will slide back and out. And then right here is where the microphone goes, and you can see here it's just a clip, so you can get a interior trim tool, wedge it in there, and just pop the microphone out. And we'll throw that to the side here. And this is what we're dealing with. Here is the bungee mechanism. This prevents the pillar pod from blowing up into your face. And so this whole clip slots into that, as you can see, that slots into this little notch here. And then of course, here are the clips, right? Actually, this clip, I think, snaps back into there when you put the pod back together. And then this clip is the top clip of the pillar itself. And here is our little Dolby Digital THX. No, this is just a little microphone. And yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab the pillar pod setup. But first, we're gonna go ahead and wire up the pillar pod gauges and run those, the ODB2 plug. I'm probably gonna drop it down here in this slot here. Probably will pop this side panel off and then work the plug into under the dash and get that all ready to go. Then we'll go ahead and get this thing hooked up. Here is the Y plug that I received with my secondary gauge, which was the super gauge. And note, it has 6-pin connectors on the end. And note on the back of the gauge here, there is a 4-pin and a 6-pin. This gauge closest to me, you can see the jumper. This is the secondary gauge. And also note there is a 6-pin on this end. You're not gonna be using that for this install. This is for, I guess, some expansion stuff later on, if you go that route. These are the 2 plugs I'm gonna be plugging in. These will actually go to the 6-pin plugs here and to my other gauge over here, my DataMonster. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug these in between each other. Just make sure you don't rip this apart, He-Man or whatever. And then if you look here, here is the ODB2 plug. We're gonna route this, and here is the 4-pin. The 4-pin will actually go to the DataMonster, my primary 4-pin plug. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this plugged in, and we're gonna go ahead and take this back into the car and get this cord ran. And we're gonna go ahead and get some zip ties that do provide us, get all those so everything's kind of zipped up out of the way. And I also did, when I ordered this, I got their 2-in-1 Y ODB plug. I'm probably gonna put that in there just so I'll have an open ODB2 port. Now I know that does cause some issues with some stuff, so if it doesn't work out, I will just delete it. But I'll go ahead and put it in place, and then yeah, we'll see where we're going for there. I have the Y cable connecting the 2 gauges hooked up. Kind of see it here pretty good. Pretty simple. And you can see this little extra connector here can, I believe, go to some extra sensors and whatnot if you run that. I'm not running any sensors for now, but maybe down the road I can hook up a wideband or something like that to it, or ethanol sensor. Now here is the primary gauge ODB2 sensor, and here is that ODB2 to ODB2 split Y cable that I'm going to be running. Also got this from Banks. I think it was like 30 bucks for that. So I'll be hooking this to my ODB2 port, this to one of these, and then I'll leave one free in case I want to plug in, like a Torque app style ODB2 Bluetooth reader or something like that. If I need to do any additional diagnostics above and beyond what the DataMonster can do, or if I want to hook up anything else for whatever purposes. Hopefully this works. I'm guessing it should, but I know there can be some issues with data logging running this, or if you have like an HP tuner programmer and stuff like that. Often you don't want to program through a split cable like this. It could cause some kind of latency issues and whatnot. So we're gonna go ahead and get back in the car. And then we're gonna go ahead and pop this side panel off. Just get like a pry tool or something, you can get it wedged in here, and this pops just straight off and outwards towards the door. That gives me some access room. And then I'll just run the cable up and through here and leave a little bit of it kind of sitting out here to plug in once I get the A-pillar pod kind of situated. And then I can have everything plugged into the ODB2 port right here. And then I'll just tuck the stuff up behind here, zip tie it with the provided zip ties, and get everything so you don't want any cables hanging down by your feet to be caught while you're driving and yank some cords out or rip your gauge pod plug out or something crazy. So go ahead and get this off. We'll get this thing lined up. I'll show you how I end up wiring it, and then we can go ahead and bring the gauge pod over here, get this thing plugged into the primary gauge, the DataMonster, and then hopefully do a quick test and see how that goes. Then we can actually get the pillar pod installed, get the bungee reconnected, and the microphone. This is the ODB2Y splitter. I wrapped it behind the release for the hood, and then I have one of the plugs sitting here. It's kind of just wedged up there. It's not super tight. It can hang down a little bit. Doesn't interfere with anything. And then, as you can see here, I tucked it up through a gap in the back, and then it fed into here. I plugged in the actual ODB2 to primary gauge plug, and then I just wedged the extra cords back down here, and then I ran the cord up through the gap right here, and then it came out right here where the air pillar will be. Left a little bit of room so it can definitely reach the gauge without any extra tension on it. And then I might clean up this wire a little bit, maybe tuck it out of the way a little bit better. But I mean, it should be completely safe right here. It's not really impacting anything. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab the gauge pod, plug this into the primary, and then I will turn the car on, not fully, just accessory, see if the gauges turn on or not. And then if they do, that tells me we should be good, and I can go ahead and reinstall everything. I have the DataMonster cable plugged in from the ODB2Y splitter, and I tried to just turn on ACC without starting the car, and nothing came on, so I'm not sure if I have to actually physically start the car. And so go ahead and see if I can hold this and start the car. Okay, as you can see, it does say DataMonster, and it does say Super Gauge. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually plug this in and mount it so I don't have to hold it in place. And then we'll come back and get this configured. I have the bungee reattached, kind of seat up here, and the microphone snapped back into place. And for the bungee, it just slots back in. And I do have my clip left here in the mounting chassis. Hopefully I can just line that up and my clip will go in there. It's kind of a pain to pull those back out. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna see if I can finesse this back into place, and then I'll get the side panel down here reattached, and then we'll go ahead and see if we can get this thing configured. I have the A-pillar installed, snapped into place pretty good. Maybe a tiny bit more of a gap here, but I mean, I probably just need to finesse the clip a little bit more. But other than that, I mean, it's super nice looking. I mean, it looks factory. That's why I went with it, because it matches this texture and look identical to, what I took off. So some of them, you can get carbon fiber ones, you get other ones. I didn't want to go carbon fiber, because if I did carbon fiber over here, I would have had to done carbon fiber over there. Then, that I've already gone down the carbon fiber rabbit hole. Now, as you can see here, initially popped up saying I need to set up the displacement. So I need to go through the menus and figure out and configure everything. So you can configure, gauge layout, data logging, gauge selection, diagnostics, shift light. I mean, there's modules, system information. You can do firmware updates. I mean, this thing has a ton of features, and I need to figure out all this as well. And here we go. You want to make sure you go to settings, vehicle selection, and you want to make sure you pick your type of vehicle. Otherwise, you're not going to get the right PIDs, so your readouts are probably not going to be correct. I believe for the ZL1, which is what I'm in, I'm going to do the GM standard, but you can scroll through, see the options. If you have a Duramax, they do have slightly different install than the other vehicle. It looked like you had to do something with your fuse box, so keep that in mind. It might have been the Ram, but some of the diesel ones. So I believe I can just go to GM standard, and then it says reboot device. It just rebooted, and also rebooted the secondary one because they are tied together. And then please select engine displacement. And we're gonna go to, for me, this is the ZL1 as mentioned, 6.2 liter. Okay, that looks correct. I already did that. All right, yes. Yes, yes. Okay, and then now if you notice, this is the default initial view, and you can see that they're pretty much showing the exact same thing. So we can dive in, and you can hit the right arrow here to bring up your layouts, and then you can do gauge layouts. If you want 2 gauge, let's check out the 2 gauge. So you can split it like that, which is why I love this setup with Banks, is you can really just go all out. I mean, look, 8 gauge. That's the default. You know, really depends on how much stuff you want to do. You can set up alerts, mid-max, log, shift light, which would probably be pretty cool. The Banks modules, if you have some add-ons, you can do. So let's go to gauge selection, and look, I mean, you have tons of features. I'm not really sure how I want this configured yet. I'm going to tinker with it. We'll come back, take a look at how I end up with it. But it's super easy to set these up. You just, like I said, you want to hit the top right arrow, you'll set it up. Then you can do this the same setup, set up your bottom ones differently, and then you get a nice array up to, I mean, you can see up to 16 different readouts between 2 gauges. That surely beats my, you know, default 4 readouts that I have on the car, and those can be slightly customized, but there's, you know, very limited on what you can do. So, you know, if you really want to break it out, this thing can show me a million different things. You know, so let's see. Oh, you can do custom pages, and yeah, I mean, there's, let's say we don't want RPM. Let's say I want to do something else, and then you can delve down into air density, emissions, just, I mean, we'll go back. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and mess with these, see what I can come up with, and then, you know, we'll take a look and wrap this up. Pretty easy, pretty cool. Did some more tinkering. As you can see, blue down here, temporary, I haven't adjusted that gauge yet, but you can actually set a number of colors for your buttons. You can set colors for the, you know, where it says boost and all this other stuff, the background, bar color if you have like a bar gauge, and then you can actually access that by going down to your settings, and then there's a layout, theme colors, and you can do some custom pages, bar graph configurations. So you can definitely, you'll want to go around and just, you know, look at this yourself and just see all the cool features you can really adjust. That's what's cool about this, super adjustable. So here you're gonna do the background. I have a black background. You can do the label, which is that, you know, up that pretty much background of the text. So I went with red, white lettering. You can do divider color, bar graph, button color. So you can set your buttons to a number of different colors, very customizable. And then another cool feature, you notice I have 5 gauges on this one for right now, just because they're a little bit easier to see. And I started off, I put boost on the top. I haven't tested that to make sure it is boosting, because it doesn't show vacuum, it just shows boost, positive boost, which maybe there's another setting I have to go through to find. It'll show me vacuum and boost, but for now it just shows boost. And then I set the engine coolant temperature is this one. I set my engine oil temperature for this one, and then I have my intake temperature and my manifold temperature. So these are the ones I'm showing just for now. I'm gonna probably tinker with them, and then I haven't adjusted the bottom one yet. I'll do that later, but I can, you know, as you notice, it's already showing like fuel, load, battery. I mean, tons of cool features. I'll probably keep that one as a 6 and put like, you know, less needed stuff I don't need to look at as often. And yeah, definitely reading correctly, because if you look here, it shows my engine coolant temp 190, and if you look on the gauge itself, it roughly points to about 190, and you know, if you look at the fuel percentage, I'm under 50%, and the bottom one, you look down here, it shows 43%. That looks accurate, so it is giving me correct readings. So yeah, definitely tons of customization on this thing. I haven't tested out the data logging, and of course you'll put the micro SD in the slot right here if you want to do data logging, and that would maybe be another video if I go down that route, but it's pretty easy. You just enable, you know, you go here, and then you can go up to data logging, and then you can go through that. It'll save it as, I believe, a CSV file, you know, which you can output, and you know, most tuners can read that pretty good. And then you have diagnostics if you have an engine code like I do, so we can go ahead and check engine codes here, and then we can check for codes. I should have a code dealing with my catalyst, being that I have secondary cat deletes. So I'm not sure if this can read through the Y split. We'll see. Okay, and check vehicle codes. Oh, yep, catalyst systems, which is expected. At least I've been experiencing that a while. Gives me tons of info on this. So yeah, so that works. And of course the button's super easy to manipulate. And you know, I think I have the gauges relatively straight. Maybe this one I can tweak a little bit more to the left. Maybe to the right, I don't know. But you know, but yeah. Anyway, so that's it. I mean, pretty cool. I love this ZZPerformance pillar pod, hooking these Banks gauges up super easy. And yeah, I'll get out of the car, we'll wrap this up, and you know, I'll probably drive it around the block and just get some last, you know, minute impressions of it before I finish this video up. But so far, I mean, super easy install, looks awesome. It's gonna give me tons of good data on the fly, because I mean, these gauges are nice, but they're not, I mean, 160 to 210, and I'm not even sure what those dashes represent on some of these things. They seem like they're different based on where the dash is, so they're not the most informative, and you know, you don't really get a lot of options. This, I have a million options, a million different layouts, colors, everything. So yeah, I'll go ahead and take it for a spin, get my workout in, and we'll wrap this video up. There you have it. That wraps up this video on the Banks iDash gauges, the DataMonster, and the Super Gauge installed in my ZL1 Camaro using the ZZPerformance 2 gauge pod, a pillar mount setup. Super easy install. I had no issues really. Drove it around, performed great. All the gauges read as I was expected, and you know, really no complaints. You know, the big thing I did notice with the gauge pod was maybe the gauges are tilted upward just a little too much. It'd be nicer if they're tilted just slightly downward. That's really nitpicking on that. The gauges themselves, super versatile, maybe a little expensive, but I mean, you get a lot for the money. So, you know, you're gonna kind of expect paying a little bit more for this, a little bit more customization and, you know, capabilities such as the data logging and some of the other features. They do seem to add features relatively frequently. You can do a firmware update. I believe with a micro SD card, you slide it in there and you can update the gauges that way. So not only are they, you know, customizable of what you get out the box, but they also upgradable over time when they add new features. So overall, I mean, so far I'm happy. I was able to figure out the boost gauge where it was reading 0 pegged when it was in vacuum. There's actually, I went back in there and was able to find under the pressure, a pressure vacuum PID setting. I selected that, and now I can read vacuum and boost all in the same data point on the gauge. So yeah, that's it. Feel free to subscribe, like, share, you know, all this fun stuff. Hopefully I have a lot more cool videos coming, you know, relatively soon. I still have a ton of parts just sitting around my garage I need to install. It is fall now in Texas, still 100 degrees or so. Hopefully it'll start cooling down. I can get these videos, you know, and these installs knocked out, and you know, a lot more coming soon. So anyways, thanks for stopping by. Peace.